You're listening to Cosmic Cousins Soul-Centered Astrology. I am your host, Jeff Henshaw. Thanks for tuning in. Cosmic Cousins is dedicated to honoring the interconnectedness of our universal family through embodied health, self-discovery, and deeper learning. And it is here to bring you back into alignment with the cosmos. So thank you for being here as always. Hey there, Cosmic Cousins. Welcome to the Taurus Full Moon Total Lunar Eclipse episode. This is right in the heart of Scorpio season in 2022, and it's in Taurus. Taurus is the polar sign of Scorpio, so it offers us a balance to the deep well of emotion that often is Scorpio season. Daylight savings time just ended, so the clocks are set back an hour, which means it gets darker in the evening if you're in a place that honors daylight savings time. I overheard a conversation yesterday that was saying that in Oregon, where I live, that daylight savings time will end in 2024. Like, that will no longer be a thing. So I'll be interested to see if that happens, because I've been hearing people talk about that for years. But I always find it interesting that the time gets set back during Scorpio season, that not only are the days getting shorter, but that is further emphasized by us losing an hour in the evening. So we're going into the darkness. We're going into the underworld. We're right here in the middle of Scorpio season. And I've lit a candle. I encourage you to do the same whenever you listen to this podcast. This is an intention for ritual. And the candle that I lit is by Blossom and Burr. And it says it's for ritual and spell work, petal and thorn. It says gentle, nurturing energy to heal the healer, support healthy boundaries, and to help trust your own heart. So I've got that lit here. I'm sending that flame out to you. And also, if you want to grab your tarot cards too, I always encourage you to do that too. I bring tarot into my astrology practice and a love of somatic practices and the body as someone who taught yoga for many years. And actually, the person that we have on the podcast today, I think you're really going to enjoy. Many of you might already know them, but Renee Sills of Embodied Astrology is joining us today in a conversation. Renee is a double Leo with a Taurus moon, and she posts free bi-monthly horoscope columns, podcasts, and guided meditations, which focus on how astrology manifests in our everyday experiences and also through our bodies. So that conversation will come in a moment. But first, I'd like to touch in with you here about this Taurus full moon total lunar eclipse. And so if you're new here, we often bring the awareness to our body and bring the cosmic practice of astrology into the body through our breath. And so if it calls to you, you could go ahead and start bringing awareness to your body now and begin to take deep, nourishing inhales. I also offer 3 phrases for each lunation, and these phrases can be used to inspire a tarot spread. They can also be used as a mantra or affirmation, and could also elicit deeper conversation with yourself and with other people. And so the phrases I have for this Taurus full moon is I ground, I illuminate, I go within. And my dog is yawning here in the background. I don't know if you can hear him. He's actually a Taurus moon, conjunct Uranus and Taurus, which this full moon is also conjunct Uranus, so we'll talk about that. But for now, I ground, I illuminate, I go within. Just notice what these phrases might bring up for you. So this Taurus full moon, again, it's a total lunar eclipse. And it is Tuesday, November 8th, 2022 at 3:02 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So early morning, Tuesday, November 8th, which is also Election Day here in the United States. It is found at the 16 degrees and 1 minute of Taurus, so you can look to this part of your chart. You can also look to any other placements in your chart that are within a few degrees of 16 degrees, and then that would mean that this full moon is aspecting a part of your natal chart. So I ground, I illuminate, I go within. I included a photo in the newsletter for this full moon, and it's an image of a human meditating, and their third eye is illuminated. I selected this as the cover image for this lunation in hopes that it might inspire us to go within. You can also check it on the Instagram too, cosmic.cousins. But why am I focusing on the third eye here? This is actually a center in esoteric astrology that is associated with Taurus. Taurus is connected to the third eye. And you can think of the bull's eye, right? Taurus is the bull, the seat of intuition. And with this full moon conjunct Uranus, which Uranus is the planet of electricity, technology, of rebellion. Often say Uranus is the planet of radical insights. The connection to the third eye feels further emphasized. And so if you're able, close your eyes, place one hand on your heart, one hand on your throat, and begin to breathe into the third eye. So placing one hand on the heart, Taurus is ruled by the planet Venus, connecting us to love, to our heart. Taurus is also connected to the throat, connecting us to the ability to communicate in a way that is resounding, while also Taurus is connected to the third eye center. So while connecting with the earth, while connecting with your body, begin to breathe into the third eye. So under the light of this full moon, since it's a lunar eclipse, ritual that is more intentional, like setting intentions, is not necessarily encouraged under an eclipse. It's more of a time to simply observe. And so this eclipse is actually going to be visible in many places in the world. And it's going to be visible here in the Pacific Northwest, but it's raining, so I may not be able to see it, but I do plan to catch this lunar eclipse, and so perhaps you'll go and observe it too. I've included a timetable from a website that I found, so there's a link in the show notes if you want to see where this lunar eclipse is visible. But it's more of a lunation that, elicits awe. The last time I saw a lunar eclipse, I was living in Hawaii right when I launched the podcast, and that was in Aquarius season of 2018, and the full moon was in Leo, and I was in a hot tub watching the eclipse. That's the last time I've been able to see one. And so the moments in my life when I have actually been able to observe eclipses, they have been really important, pivotal moments in my life. And they're very memorable. So if you are able to see this eclipse, then it may indicate to you that you are at a pivotal moment in your life. Fateful realignments are happening. If you're not able to observe it, then perhaps this is a time of going more within, which in general, the energy of an eclipse, things in the world around us can feel heightened. Emotions can feel heightened. Things happening on the world stage and collectively likely will feel heightened. And there's a lot of shifting and changing taking place when the eclipses occur. And so from my perspective as a soul-centered astrologer and someone who practices meditation and mindfulness, the eclipses are times to go within. And so this is why part of the phrase here, it's I ground, which is Taurus, I illuminate, which is connecting us to the esoteric nature of Taurus in the third eye, and I go within for the eclipse. And so open yourself up to receiving insight. The full moon will always offer us time to receive insight, but particularly during the eclipse, because the eclipse represents evolution. Throughout this entire year of 2022, we've had the North Node of Fate in the sign of Taurus. And so we have been evolving towards the Taurian traits in our life. So I encourage you to connect to that light of Taurus, to breathe in light into the third eye, to breathe light into the areas of your body in need of healing. I have been practicing yin yoga or restorative yoga a lot more regularly this Scorpio season. There's a lot of water in the heavens on this particular full moon that I'd like to just touch base with you on, because as we continue throughout Scorpio season, this water energy gets more activated. Right now, the Sun, Mercury, and Venus are in the fixed water sign of Scorpio. And there is a grand water trine that is being activated and awakened right now. So right now, Cancer, Black Moon, Lilith, and Pallas are in Cancer. Again, the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and the South Node of Fate are in Scorpio. And then Juno, Neptune, and Jupiter are in Pisces. And so there's a great deal of emotional healing taking place right now. A lot of opportunities for clarity around themes of home and family, to begin to understand cycles, karmic patternings that we find ourselves in. So if you're interested in reading more about these watery planets, I posted it on Instagram, and I'll put a link in the show notes to that. But just knowing that it's very activated, this water energy. And so if you have a lot of water in your chart, look to see where these planets are lining up with your birth chart. And this Taurus full moon, this North Node in Taurus, is here to offer us practical healing for all the water that's taking place. And so again, open yourself up to insight at this time. Quiet the mind in order to receive new insight on ways to invite practical love into your life. And so if emotions arise, allow them to surface. And in the words of Renee in our conversation, Renee said, allow your heart to break open. And this is what Renee said in relationship to this Taurus full moon. And so that's what I want to title this conversation, Allow Your Heart to Break Open. And so let's come back to these phrases. I ground, I illuminate, I go within. So our questions for reflection: how might I take a more grounded approach? Perhaps you pull a tarot card for this, or journal about this, or just tune into it. How might I take a more grounded approach? What within me is ready to be illuminated? And how might I more deeply go within? The affirmation I have for us for this Taurus full moon: when I slow down my body, I slow down my mind. I communicate my truth with ease and grace. I'm wishing for you an easeful full moon and remainder of Scorpio season. Again, my name is Jeff Henshaw. Thanks as always for tuning in. If you're interested in deepening your studies, I am taking applications for one-on-one mentorships with me for this coming year, 2023. And in addition, there are open slots available for deep dive astrology readings. As always, it's an honor for me to be here with you. If you'd like to leave some love, you could leave some reviews if you're listening through the iTunes app, the podcast app. You could rate, review. You could also send this to loved ones. This helps me to grow the podcast and also to just offer this service to more people. And at this time, we're ready to transition into our conversation with the brilliant Renee Sills of Embodied Astrology. So here with us today on Cosmic Cousins, I'm super excited to be gathering with Renee Sills, who actually, Renee is someone that people bring up to me a lot. I think that our practices in some way, they're connected because we both work with embodied astrology. And I thought it was cool because Renee is a double Leo and I'm a double Aquarius. So we have that polar sign action going on. And then we both have earth moons. So I'm going to read a little bit about Renee, Renee's bio here. And then we'll get into some convo. So, an astrologer's daughter, Renee grew up speaking the language of astrology and has been fortunate to learn from Heidi Rose Robbins, Emily Trinkhaus, Carol Ferris, Judith Hill, Eric Francis, and many more. Renee has been practicing as an astrologer since 2012, offering her clients chart interpretations that include individualized yoga, meditation, and self-care regimens. She posts free bi-monthly horoscope columns, podcasts, and guided meditations, which focus on how astrology manifests in our everyday experiences and through our bodies. Renee has been a yoga teacher since 2004 and is the co-founder and co-director of SOLA School of Contemplative Arts, a somatics and mindfulness-based yoga teacher training program that has a strong focus on accessibility and social justice. So thank you for being here with us today on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be in conversation with you.
Yeah, I was looking over the list of teachers and Heidi Rose Robbins was one of the people that was like, you need to connect with Renee.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
I saw her at one point a couple of years ago and she brought your name up. And I think that was the first time I remember hearing your name. Mm-hmm.
So I started listening to your podcast when Heidi mentioned your name, or I might have already been listening to it. I'm not really certain, but your offering embodied astrology is so grounded and is so connected to social justice that it really speaks to me. And I know if anyone that's listening to my podcast is not familiar with your work, they're going to really resonate with your offering. So I'm excited for people to get to know you today. And we're honoring the Taurus Full Moon Total Lunar Eclipse today. And I thought this was a cool time to connect with you since you have a Taurus moon.
Thank you so much for all of that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So, okay, what came first for you? Was it embodiment and somatic practices, or was it astrology? I was reading in your bio that you're an astrologer's daughter.
Yeah, I think it was astrology that came first. My mom started studying astrology at least a couple of years before I was born. And she was very invested in studying it when I was young. I have cassette tape recordings of my earliest readings, the first of which I think I got when I was under a month old. And she really used it as a language in her parenting with me and would talk about it in ways that I think as a young child, I just accepted as true because that's what you do when you're a kid and your parents tell you things. And then as I became a little older, when I got into adolescence, there were a couple of years when I was really annoyed by her constant referral to astrology. And I was definitely the only person I knew whose parents talked about it, and I was like, what are you talking about? This is so weird, that kind of thing. And then by the time I got into my mid-teens, it was cool to me. And it was about at that point that I became also a child of embodiment practices and somatic work in my kind of early to mid-teens.
Fascinating. This is kind of the reverse for me. I came into my body, and because of my yoga practice, it opened up my consciousness to receiving astrology as a language. So do somatic practices help balance the very cosmic cerebral practice of astrology for you?
Yeah, totally. And, the first ways that they went together for me was through archetypal embodiment. My first somatic teacher is a woman named Melissa Michaels. She's still teaching. She's still fabulous. She does a kind of a really interesting approach to creative arts therapies or expressive arts therapies, and dance is definitely very much a part of it, and movement, somatization of different kinds of energies. And so I think having been raised with a zodiacal framework and kind of a language for energy that comes through people that is archetypal, like that was already part of my understanding, was that, people act out their Scorpio and, they're, and people act out their Leo and they're like, yeah. And, these different energies. And so when I started working with embodiment, it just felt like a continuation of that research. But then later, in my late teens, I also began to study yoga. And that actually brought me back around to astrology again, because the roots of yoga and astrology are, they're the same root. And so that was an interesting circling back to astrology. And at that point actually was when I really began to study it, because I realized like, oh, this is this is a whole technology, this is a deep practice that's connected to much more than the psychological dramatization of something. And I mean, with all respect to my mom, and I think she was a brilliant astrologer, she was also someone who was really studying the psychological work, and psychological astrology. And she, to the best of my knowledge, wasn't looking at the roots or the origins so much, and maybe their ties to the body. But I could be wrong about that. She passed away when I was a teenager. But I do remember a shift in my orientation with astrology when I came to it through a yoga practice.
So is there somewhere in your birth chart, because we're going to look at your chart some today, if you're okay with it.
Sure.
Is there somewhere in your chart where you sense having a mother that was interested in astrology?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, first of all, I'm moon exalted in Taurus, and my Venus, the dispositor of the moon, is in Virgo, and Mercury is in Virgo too. So they kind of thread to astrology, really, with Mercury being the ruler of astrologers. But my mom was also the person that got me into body work and somatic work. And it's funny to be talking about this, because I was just in New Mexico, and which is where I was born. And when I was there, I was having this really sensual experience with the land, and the rocks there are so red and they look like muscle to me. And it's something that I have encountered every time I've been there, is looking down at the rocks and feeling like I'm looking at a body, a body of muscle. And then the sky is so blue, and it reminds me of my mother's eyes, that shade of blue. And I was remembering when I was there, the first dream that I ever had. And I think I was about 4 years old. And in the dream, I was playing in this bright green yard, and there was a white fence around the yard. And on the other side of the fence was this dirt road and nothingness. And my mom came walking down that road on crutches, and she came into the yard, and she sat down and she put her leg up, and all the skin was off of her leg, and all the muscles and the tendons and the bones were exposed. And she was pointing out to me the anatomy and talking to me about the functions and telling me the names. And in that moment, I was fascinated. There was no fear in my dream. There was no aversion. It was just, this return, and then this fascination. And I think sometimes about the path that my life has taken, which is not at all what I would have thought that it would have done, if I thought I was leading my own life. I don't think I necessarily would have ended up on this path. But, there's something about the inheritance, I think, for me, of being my mother's daughter, that really has brought me into the intersections, of astrology and embodiment. Now I can't even remember what the question was that you asked that led me on this tangent. But
I'm fascinated with where you're highlighting in your chart, because the question was, is there somewhere on your chart that you connect your mother
Right.
being an astrologer to?
Right, right. Yeah, no, thank you for, for reining in that tangent. Yes, that's it. I think, this love of the body and orientation towards it as a site of wisdom, and also an orientation towards a language of symbolism and a willingness to believe in it is something that I really was raised with, and I got from her. And when I think about my moon, and I think people experience Taurus moons very differently, but for me, I really feel the exaltation of having a mother that really saw me. I felt very seen by her and very nourished, very supported. And the ways that I felt nourished and supported were the ways that she, in many ways, received the most backlash from her family and sometimes from other parents. Because I was an unconventional child and I had unconventional needs, and she knew my chart, and she trusted my body. And when I knew something in my body, she would trust that because she was invested in somatic practice. And so I feel like in a lot of ways, and my mom died when I was 17. She died actually quite abruptly. And her departure was, hugely impacting and traumatizing for me. And I think it took me the better part of 10 to 15 years to really kind of come back from the chasm that grief can open up. But she is a mythic figure for me, and I think about like that moon that I have in my 10th house. I really feel her there, and I feel her inheritance. And I feel her modeling and exampling. And then I also feel the complexity of my own psychology with her and, her limitations as well as her gifts. But that's one place I would see it. And the other place in my chart, I feel is I have South Node conjunct with Neptune. And in that way, I feel like I've come from a million mothers who were astrologers, and a million like I've come from 1,000 lifetimes of being born into families who are seekers.
Yeah. First off, thank you for your willingness to share your experience around grief. And I'm feeling the Scorpio polarity to that Taurus too. And also, you said you're connecting this to the body, the love of the body, the wisdom of the body. And we also heard you talk about the wisdom of nature too, just being back in Santa Fe, where you're from, and feeling, when you were describing the landscape and the muscles and the sky, the color of the sky and everything, it felt you brought me in my body. And I think this is something that, having a Taurus moon, and a big part of your offering is bringing people into their body. And I almost felt like a sense of like ecstasy, like wash over me when you were describing the landscape. I could really feel it. I'm really fascinated by you highlighting the moon in Taurus. Then you mentioned Venus and Virgo, Mercury and Virgo. And where my eye went when you started talking about your mother as an astrologer was actually the other earth sign, which is Capricorn. You have Pallas in Capricorn. And Pallas was born from Jupiter's head, from their parents' head, and it's coming out sprouting with this wisdom. So I, in my own practice, associate Pallas with astrologers who had parents as astrologers. An example, Heidi Rose Robbins has a Taurus midheaven with Pallas and Taurus right on the midheaven.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So this actually completes the grand earth trine in your chart. We have Pallas in Capricorn, trine Moon in Taurus, and then trine Venus in Virgo. Sprinkling in the asteroids always gives us a little extra flavor of magic, I know that you've been doing too, which I kind of want to talk a little bit today about some of the asteroid energy too. But before we do that, I just want to also say you mentioned the Neptune South Node conjunction you have in your chart. It's also hanging out with the galactic center, if we want to bring that too. So coming from other galaxies of mothers and
Oh, yes. Yeah, I fully feel like I'm an intergalactic grandchild for sure.
Okay, so when we're talking about the landscape, you were kind of doing this visualization of the landscape. You were really helping us tap into a part of Taurus that I don't think we always talk about, but Taurus, from an esoteric perspective, is connected to the third eye center and this ability to visualize. And I sometimes think of Taurus as using the five senses to activate and awaken the sixth sense of intuition. It is a very intuitive energy. And I even think about like sitting under a tree and deep meditation as being a Taurian experience. And I was looking through some of your Instagram today, and you kind of were leading this meditation in one of the videos. And I could feel that wisdom of the third eye while it's still being grounded and practical. So I had shared an esoteric phrase with you, Alice Bailey's esoteric phrase for Taurus, which I'll just read. And then I'd love to know if it brings up anything for you as a Taurus moon. And maybe this will also offer wisdom for people under the light of this particular full moon lunation. So the phrase is, I see, and when the eye is opened, all is illumined.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love that invitation into feeling Taurus in that way. And where my attention went was towards one of Taurus's body rulerships, which is the cerebellum. And this is a part of the brain that is very much, part of our animal brain, because we are animals. We live in animal bodies. And it coordinates our muscle function and helps us to maintain balance. And it plays a pretty significant role in attention and being able to focus attention, as well as in being able to regulate between pleasure and pain, or tangentially from pleasure and pain, attraction and aversion. So, I feel that the predicament that we find ourselves in, this realm of our human incarnation is a predicament of disembodiment. And in that predicament, we are trapped in ignorance, and that's part of being alive in the age of suffering, or the Kali Yuga, or whatever. I mean, however people want to think about it, I think about it in an astrological term for sure. But Taurus has so much to do with desire, coming after Aries, coming after this impulse, the Mars ruled impulse to move towards desire. And then being ruled by Venus, the sensory body. And in a context where we can't connect the mind and body very easily, or where the mind and body have been so severed from one another, and where we in our consciousness have been taught that we are severed from nature, that we are not nature, and that we are not animal, and therefore that we are not in reciprocity. It's like we have been conditioned to experience, I think, much of the destructive nature of desire, because the impulse of desire in our animal body and the actual capacity to process desire and feel into what it needs and what it wants and where it's coming from, we're disintegrated. There's a lack of coherence. And so when I think about Taurus as an energy that opens us into seeing and clear vision, I think about the sensation that I get when I'm really embodied in a meditative space, which is that the base of my brain and the top of my spine is open, and I feel energy moving up and down through my spine, and my pelvic floor feels alive, and I feel the pulsing of the earth, and I feel myself breathing, and everything is a sensual experience. And it's that simple, right? And then desire becomes so life-giving in that space. What I feel myself desiring in that space is wellness and pleasure, like deep pleasure, but not a not a temporary satisfaction of a like fleeting material pleasure, something that might overwhelm my taste buds or something, but not be a lasting satiation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel that, the awakening of Taurus is really, it does bring us into insight, and it brings us into coherence and integrity and integration between the mind and body. And that said, the flip side of that is that the deadening of the Taurus space in the body really leads to kind of materialism and consumption and focus on or desire motivated focus that can be, I think, quite antithetical to the life force and to actually being awake within this phenomenal realm, this material realm.
Mm-hmm. There's something almost quite like animalistic in the way that you were describing some of that. And if we're considering Taurus as a sign that's connected to nature, it's not just the trees and the plants, but also the animals too. And I think about this a lot with my dog, that when the first thing he does when he wakes up in the morning is stretches. And then when we're going on a walk, if he doesn't want to walk anymore, he like pulls me to stop so we can lay down and roll in the grass. He knows intuitively what his body needs at all times. And something in what you were saying brought that image up for me of just the intuitive nature of an animal.
Yes. And, I want to say again, we are animals. Human beings are animals. And I think that part of the inheritance that we all are trying to contend with being alive on Earth now is that we have not been allowed to be animals in the true sense of the word, in the sense of understanding all beings as incarnate divinity, not in the subjective sense of humans versus animals, where animals somehow have become less than human, within like so-called civilized society or whatever. And animals are extracted from and exploited. Like, that's not what I mean. But in this sense of what has happened to us and what continues to happen has been forced movement of our animal bodies, or forced immobility or forced use of the animal body. And such a deep trauma around that our human consciousness has separated from the body, right? And that separation gets promoted constantly by all kinds of systems. It's in the vested interest of many systems to keep us quite disembodied. But what happens with Taurus, in this particular kind of energy, which I think is really interesting, is that when Taurus is pushed too fast, it just stops. And there's a kind of halting and inability to move forward that I think is part of the wisdom of Taurus energy, and what builds in the body when it's forced to move and not ready to, or not willing to, or to move in a way that it doesn't want to move. I think is in a lot of ways a mutation of animal intelligence, which doesn't go away, but it gets buried somewhere. And then we get the other part of the Scorpio, axis with Taurus, and the disruption or something like that.
When you were talking about pleasure and pain, I was thinking about that axis of Taurus and Scorpio. I often think of Leo as also being a sign that is kind of animalistic too. And so I'm just thinking about you as a double Leo with a Taurus moon, and it's just kind of like, it's fully embodied. And I think of both of these signs as being connected to embodiment in different ways. And so one of the questions I had here is, do you feel your Leo or Taurus is more influential in your love of embodiment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if I have an answer. The Leo part of me wants to embody as a art form, and through the drama of something, and throwing myself into it. When I think of a Leo, the way that Leo is embodied, I was having this conversation with another person that has a lot of Leo, and we were commiserating on the fact that people think that we're performing, but we're just being authentic, you know, and that there's a way that Leo is just so full on, you know, that people might think, oh, you're performing. And it's like, no, this is real. Like, this is just this, you know, 110%, like this, that Leo embodiment. Whereas Taurus, you know, I feel is so sensory and so sensual, and the embodiment feels a lot more receptive than projective, where Leo, you know, the Leo embodiment can be quite projecting. You know, Taurus is, it's that earth element, like coming down and in.
There's something interesting. Like when I listen to you talk, you're very intellectual, and I find people with strong Taurus placements oftentimes are, even though we talk about it as such a body-based sign. I mean, one of my favorite Taurus moons is Audre Lorde. I love like connecting to the Taurus moon. A lot of their work focused on the body. They were an Aquarius sun, so they're coming in with that, you know, kind of humanitarian social justice slant, which so do you. And actually a lot of Tauruses have connection to social justice. Thinking of like Malcolm X as a Taurus. Martin Luther King Jr., I believe, was a Taurus rising. So some of this might even be felt, if I'm not sure how much you work with the tarot or not, but what I call it is the soul growth card, which is the Hierophant for Taurus, which in modern depictions, like the modern witch tarot, or in the fifth spirit tarot, which is a tarot deck for a world beyond binaries, it shows essentially a teacher who's leading a group of people. And oftentimes it will be books, which I think of as manifested wisdom. I often think of Taurus as this keeper of occult wisdom that is somehow manifested in the physical form, keeper of ritual. I do see a lot of Tauruses bringing people together through some sort of conversation. And these are things that I don't think traditionally we talk about with Taurus a lot, or maybe we do, and I just haven't heard people talk about it in this way. But I wanted to bring some of that forward, and some of the even figures that I named that have Taurus, and how you might relate to that as someone with a Taurus moon.
Yeah. Where my mind was going was to my work as a horoscope maker. Because in the solar chart for Taurus, you know, to do a Taurus horoscope, you put Taurus in the first house. And so then Gemini takes the second. And when you were saying like a lot of Tauruses are very mental, it's true. You know, I think that part of the practice for me of doing horoscopes has just been to study how do these signs influence each other, you know, in their house placements. And one thing that I think with Taurus and with Gemini holding the second place is how, when we figure out what it is that we want, and when we are here incarnate in a body, the next thing that we have to do is to figure out how to share the experience, you know, or how to communicate about it with other embodied beings. And the need to share information is so fundamental to an embodied experience. And another archetype for Taurus that I love, you know, of course, is like an agrarian archetype, a farmer or a gardener. And to grow food, one needs to be a scholar of time and season and conditions and craft, and an archivist of relationship. My sweetheart is a Taurus rising, Venus, Mercury, and Taurus person, and they're an archivist and a researcher and a historian. And so when you were talking, I was thinking about the sensuality of information, you know, and the way that I think that the Taurus instinct it's magnetic, right? As a Venus ruled energy. And so it pulls towards itself but it keeps churning. It's like, like this is the power of the earth, right? To like pull into its center and churn. And it's the Taurus ruled part of the body is to chew, and pull something in and work on it. And we do that with our thoughts, and we do that with information. And I think when I think about Audre Lorde, I think about the incredible capacity to articulate an embodied experience, and that's the transmission, is to really pull somebody into the body, and the ability to share the information, right, of what it is to be here, is so fundamental a need for Taurus. So that's what comes up for me.
I'm thinking about Taurus's connection to the throat.
Yes.
And it's different than Gemini as a communicator.
Yes.
It's more about, I'm even thinking about Cher as a Taurus. It's like the booming voice that brings you into your body.
Right.
But there is something with that throat center.
The resonance. And
I love hearing that your sweetheart is a Taurus rising and is an archivist, I think I heard you say. And I'm just looking at, I'm going to just share this image with you. And for those of you listening, if you have the Fifth Spirit Tarot, you could look at this image. But it shows, here's on their ring is the Taurus glyph. And then around their throat, they have the glyph for Venus. And then behind them is all these books. And then they have two keys that are invisible but up in the air, and so this is Taurus's card in the tarot.
And I see that earth glyph pendant or something that they're wearing. Yeah.
And this is actually it's one of only two people in this tarot deck that are actually living people, but this is Carla Hayden, the Librarian of Congress. I believe the first Black woman to be the Librarian of Congress. You're also making me think of how a Taurus rising, if we're doing a horoscope, would have Aquarius midheaven, which just carries on some of what you're talking about with Gemini in the second house. And I loved hearing you talk about, if we're thinking of Taurus as the farmer, the planning and the knowledge and the strategy and the interconnectedness with community that takes place. Because obviously as a farmer, usually you need a team of people to come together, not always, but there is that interconnectedness being a farmer, even if it's just connecting to the communities and the deliveries and all the people that are going to be eating the food.
I mean, this is the thing, right? It's what are our fundamental needs? One of the most fundamental needs we have is to eat. And in order to eat, we have to coordinate our efforts. And we eat well when our efforts are coordinated and when we're feeding each other, and so I think the Taurian genius, comes out of necessity, really, and a capacity to understand that there are certain necessities that transcend all difference. And when we can speak in ways that allow other people to understand and empathize, because I think this is something important about Taurus, where yes, Taurus can be very mental, but Taurus as an energy, and maybe this is shown in the Scorpio rising, knows when somebody is full of shit. And if you are proselytizing or talking out your ass about something, or if you're offering something to a Taurian person that's symbolic and not embodied, they know it. Right. And so it's I think the innate embodied embeddedness that Taurus is, has this kind of sense of, is something real or not? Right. And so when information can be shared in a way where I think it does facilitate the Venusian principle of harmonizing, right, and bringing people together and fertilizing or something like that, then we get really happy Taurus energy, satisfied Taurus energy. People are fed. People feel grounded.
Yeah. I'm very curious about how this relates to our current transits, which is kind of getting us shifting gears towards talking about this particular Taurus full moon eclipse. So since about January, I believe we've had the North Node in Taurus, and we also have Uranus in Taurus. since 2018, 2019 is the first time that Uranus entered Taurus. So taking into consideration everything that we're talking about, how have you felt these themes show up both, I guess, in your personal life as a Taurus moon and also collectively with Uranus and the North Node?
Yeah, in my personal life, so I have Taurus in the 10th house, and my Taurus placement is ruled by Venus. I have Venus and Virgo in the 2nd house. Somewhat predictably, I guess, that my career has been going pretty well. It's been growing pretty quickly, and it's been growing in ways that have to do with the internet. I work primarily online, so that Uranian influence. And if we consider Uranus in its association with Aquarius, I have Aquarius in 7. And so, especially since the North Node has come into Taurus, I'm really trying to shape my offering as an astrologer in ways that feel innovative and somewhat disruptive to this quote unquote status quo of being a personality on the internet. And so I'm kind of in an active process right now of really shifting my platform. And I've been working with guest facilitators for the last year, but in 2023, I'm deepening a lot of those relationships, and I hope working towards a more collective and cooperative model. I think a lot of people work with embodied astrology, and I think astrology is, if it's going to be any good, needs to be inherently embodied, actually. And it's totally impossible for one person to express all there is to express about an embodiment of something, or about any kind of philosophy. So I got the URL because I started Embodied Astrology in 2014. And, I got the name and stuff, but one aspect of both Uranus in Taurus, but also Pluto in Capricorn, Pluto moving through my 6th house has been a process of, for me, like deconstructing and going to battle with a lot of what's out there in terms of being a self-employed content creator and an entrepreneur, but also a teacher and an advisor, like a coach or an astrologer or whatever, yoga teacher. It's like everybody's out there branding, making their brands. And to a certain extent, that's embodied astrology as a brand. But I really, feel very resistant to that. And so, creative breakage is what I've been calling it. And I feel Uranus in my 10th house and aspecting my Taurus moon, especially this year, is a lot of creative breakage and thinking about how to use money in different ways. EA has become more of a revenue generating job than I've ever had in my entire life. I'm someone that's used to kind of living paycheck to paycheck. And the fact that I can have a steady income now is so incredible. And also having Taurus there and my moon and Uranus there, I feel really sensitive to being in a moment collectively where there's so much lack of resource and people are struggling to eat and find stable housing. And we've got like half of the planet not even being able to meet their basic needs if they're not, being forced into migration or something, bombs dropping on them or something like that. And so, there's also a feeling of imperative for me that as someone who's able to benefit within white supremacist capitalism, that I find creative ways to use money and a platform and, a social reach, which is power. In ways that promote the kind of life-giving, fertile creativity that I feel Taurus as, and also does the work of, on some level, even if it may be small, like trying to subvert or transform economic models or push back against systems of power in ways that make sense to me in my circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, congratulations on being at a place in your life where you feel supported by your work. And a lot of it feels like, from my perspective, just observing you and your work in the world, one is a testament to your hard work. I mean, you show up very consistently to your work.
Taurus moon.
Yeah, you really do. And I've even thought on your podcast, when you release the horoscopes for each sign, as an astrologer myself, I'm like, oh my gosh, this would take me forever to release like a 30-minute podcast for each astrological sign, and the amount of dedication that takes. And maybe for you, you're an open channel and you sit down, you record it. But for me, I feel like it would take a lot of preparation to do that. And maybe it does behind the scenes. So one, I just want to reflect back to you how hardworking you are, and that, thank you for your offerings and your service to us all. And then two, I'm feeling the Uranus too, and you said some of this, but I just want to highlight it even more, is that the collaborations that you're doing, you're really bringing a lot of people together. So we have this Taurus full moon, and I had sent you some of these questions before, but maybe we'll just get into this one I'm fascinated by. Well, we have two actually, because we have an Instagram writer. Someone wrote in today on Instagram. Imagica on Instagram writes in, how is Lilith's energy playing out in this lunar eclipse? So I'll share the screen so you can look at the chart here. Here is the Taurus full moon chart. And I'm fascinated by this. We have Lilith and Pallas conjunct in Cancer here. And this is the mean black moon Lilith, trine Venus and Scorpio, and then trine Neptune and Jupiter in Pisces. So we've got a lot of water taking place, even though we're being invited towards this Taurus full moon conjunct Uranus. Same degree, 16 degrees. Wow. What a chart. So the question was about Lilith here.
I just want to take a moment. Well, I just feel like I'm on a tangential kind of day and a rambly kind of day. So I'm going to weave, but we're looking at the full moon chart, and the moon is the ruler of Cancer. And so the moon is the dispositor of Lilith and this Lilith Pallas conjunction. And I'm noticing that the grand water trine that you named of Lilith and Pallas, and then the Scorpio figures, and especially Venus and Neptune and Pisces, are all also then kited to the full moon. And so there's the opposition from Scorpio and the sextiles from the other water signs to the full moon and Uranus in the North Node. And so in that kite configuration, what I feel is the power of water moving into Earth. And Earth is a container for water. And Earth is shaped by water. And what is evoked for me is the power of emotionality and sentiment to change conditions. And at this full moon and lunar eclipse, we're at a particularly heightened emotional moment, at least in the consciousness of the so-called United States. It's the midterm elections. And that's significant, but it's also just a heightened emotional moment in general. We live in fucked up times. And people are really going through it. And there's so much grief that has not been processed. And, talking about Taurus and the need to be embodied, and the thing that happens with Taurus, when it's forced to move faster than it wants to, and the emotional buildup. And I'm thinking about just being, almost 3 years into a pandemic, being 500 years into another kind of pandemic. I don't know, the illness that is colonization and capitalist projects of enslavement and extraction. And I think that the conditions that we are living in right now and that we're living through are conditions of incredible emotional intensity. And not everybody is feeling it. And not everybody is feeling it in the same way, and so I'm looking at Neptune and Pisces, and Jupiter has just recently retrograded back into Pisces. And I'm thinking about the incredible cluster, of information and misinformation and the overwhelm and how much is happening and how big it all is and how abstract it all is and how hard it is to focus on anything because there's always so much going on. And the options that we have, in that space. And one option is to just numb out and check out or take yourself out. Another option is to somehow pull something over your eyes, right? And feel deluded and make up some kind of stories about it. Another option would be to go insane because it's insanity. And then maybe another option, and I think there's an infinite amount of options left, but one other option would be to really tune in with the resonance of empathy and allow our hearts to break open and really feel the magnitude of the moment without needing to answer it. And when I look at this chart, there are so many ways I could go with it, and I feel like where I want to go with it is where I want to go. And where I want to go is towards a future that has an imagination beyond the conditions that feel immovable in our world. So I want to go into a space where we have space, where we have space to grieve, where we have space to imagine, where we have space to feel ourselves alive and embodied beyond needing to get to work every day and figure out how we're going to feed our families and ourselves, etc. And so in this chart, I feel like there is so much feeling that's present, and that feeling has a lot of awareness of what has been left out. And this is where I feel Lilith coming in. And, Lilith in the 10th house, in this place of publicity and what is being presented in the world. And when I see Lilith and Pallas in Cancer, I feel the stories of women and femmes and queer people and people who have been marginalized. I feel the stories of people who have been cast out and demonized and made to feel othered and incarcerated and objectified and made less than human. And I feel the ways that emotionally, I think that there is a swell of resonance that is starting to happen as more and more people feel precarity and upsetness. And, the Scorpio in the South Node, like the unfairness and the cruelty of conditions. I think that people are becoming less certain in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And that falling away is allowing for a deeper kind of sentimentality and a deeper kind of emotion. And so where I want to go with this chart, which is not necessarily where I feel like it will go, but where I want to go with it is towards, that kite aspect of Uranus and the North Node in Taurus, where I just think, a new world has been coming for a long time. It's been being born for a long time. And in this moment of breakdown, there's also a lot of breakthrough. I see Saturn, in the 5th house in this chart in Aquarius, and Vesta is there, squaring on the fixed cross. And I think about the incredible creativity and coordination of movement activists and mutual aid workers and peace workers and artists and youth, and educators. And I think that there is a groundswell for change, and that it is emerging from a deep emotional thawing and resonance, movement through the waterways. I don't know. Astrology is storytelling. So that's one way I feel like I could go with it. But how about you, Jeff? Where do you go with that?
With the Lilith Palace in Cancer.
Yeah.
I love hearing you talk about astrology and the storytelling. I mean, that's a big part of the way that you describe things, and you almost feel like a channel, like when I'm listening to you, and you're just brilliant. So thank you for sharing that. I've been kind of tracking Lilith in Cancer with an example in the collective of what's been happening with Roe versus Wade. Lilith entered Cancer the day that the information leaked that it might be overturned. And that was back before Cancer season. I think it was like back in May, Lilith first entered Cancer. And then when the sun entered Cancer, that was actually when it was actually overturned. The sun lined up with Lilith in Cancer. So I've been just kind of tracking this Lilith in Cancer journey with that. So when you're speaking to women and femmes and queers and their reproductive rights, I mean, Cancer, I feel that with Lilith in Cancer. And then Pallas entered Cancer in September. And Pallas does bring in focus and clarity and restorative justice. So there is a strong, almost like deep ancestral rage and grief with Black Moon Lilith in Cancer. And then Pallas comes in with a sharp discernment that cuts through. And, the shadow of this could be what we're seeing unfolding, and what comes out of it, the way that we empower ourselves is by continuing to stand up for justice and truth, which Pallas inspires us to do. And so I always say Lilith is the queer witch in our chart, and then Pallas is, can be someone standing up for justice, but also can be someone who is an astrologer. I think of Pallas as an astrologer too, someone who is sharing wisdom about cycles. Pattern recognition is very Pallas. So I would also just encourage anyone to kind of look around 23rd degree of Cancer and see, if you have your sun here, maybe you're playing a role in this justice work and reform. If you have a Cancer midheaven, or, just kind of checking out how this overlaps with your own birth chart could be interesting for all of us to do if we're interested in Lilith, which again, I love how you talked about Lilith in Cancer looking towards the moon in Taurus as the ruler. So it does bring focus back to this full moon lunation and what it is that we're building and creating the future that we want, with Uranus being there. So I'm just really highlighting and resonating with everything that you're saying, but just offering another perspective on it. And this full moon in Taurus is looking towards Venus and Scorpio, Taurus being ruled by Venus. So there is a lot of water taking place, and just knowing that Jupiter is going back into Pisces. I love that you have this invitation of just allowing our hearts to break open and to feel the grief, to feel the emotion, ways that we can do that too in ways that are productive could be through creative outlets. With so much water, it's like having practices like painting is like very watery, can be reflective, can help us process the emotion, or music, dance, any ways that we can work with the water is great too. So that it's not just spilling out on the floor and flooding.
Yeah, thank you for bringing in the Roe v. Wade, and that piece around, yes, the material world, what's going on out there in terms of legislation. And I am not at all well-versed in this chart, but I think that the Roe v. Wade's birth chart had a pretty interesting Lilith placement as well.
I have not checked that out. I will, though.
But yeah, I think this piece around bodily autonomy and bodily rights and the relationship between bodily autonomy and land back, and kind of land sovereignty, tribal sovereignty, return of wealth, reparation, that they all go together, and that there is a need in our shared environment right now to, really examine issues around ownership, right? And control and access to resource in the material realm. And I think a lot of people want to do that. And that, yeah, there's something about this chart that in that Venus rulership, with the South Node and Mercury and the Sun there, in some ways it's kind of like, I feel like whatever is emerging around this full moon, there's so much that's happening underground that I think the full moon might show us little pieces of it. But I actually think that a lot of what this moon is about is actually driving something deeper, and again, to come back to this idea of Taurus as, chewing on something and taking it in and churning with it. And the North Node and Uranus there with the moon, and this feeling, I think, of the moon and the inner body, this feeling of instability and unsteadiness and threat that I think so many of us feel really acutely aware of in our bodies for many different reasons. And certainly these reasons become amplified with a lot of the headlines currently, et cetera. But that intensification within the emotional body also, is leading to something that is quite creative. And when you're talking about painting and dance and making art, it kind of brings me back into the future that I want as a future where we can really involve ourselves with our imaginations, because one of the effects of trauma on our bodies is to shut down our capacity for imagination and play, and feelings of exploratory creativity. And I feel like there's a call right now for us to imagine something different, and to reimagine a lot of what we've been given as unquestionable truths about how we need to live and what life is about here on planet Earth.
Mm-hmm. And when I hear you talk about that, it's bringing in this other water sign of Pisces, the Neptune in Pisces, with the imagination. And so we connected with the Scorpio and the Cancer. And so now we're bringing in some of the Pisces. So there is a lot to chew on in that Taurus way on this chart. And it's one of these charts that I've heard certain astrologers highlight at the beginning of the year. I think Rick Levine was like, oh, the Taurus full moon in November 2022, that's kind of been one of those ones that people have been looking out for. So, when
I did the 2022 year ahead readings, this full moon was definitely on my radar as one of the times of the year where it felt the most intense.
Yeah. So that's one of your offerings, is the year ahead readings. Will you be offering that going into 2023?
I will, yes.
Okay. So I would highly recommend those. I have gotten those the last few years, and they're just really brilliant. They're really for your rising sign, but you can do it for your sun and your moon. And if anyone wanted to get in touch with you, you mentioned you got the URL already. So embodiedastrology.com.
That's it.
When you said URL too for the first time, I was like, you are, and I was thinking Uranus, and we were talking about Uranus in your 10th house. So yeah, you could follow Renee on Instagram too. What else is going on? Is there anything you'd like us to know about before we close out our time? Any new offerings, things you're excited about, ways to stay in touch?
Yeah, I'm really excited about 2023 with Embodied Astrology. I definitely feel EA is an ongoing evolution of its own expression. So I've been teaching monthly workshops for the last 2 years, and I'm about to teach my last one for a little while in Sagittarius season, and then I'm going to take a break. And in 2023, I will transition into offering more movement-based work. So I'll be doing a weekly movement practice that is anchored in the astrology for the week, but we're going to be doing less talking, less thinking, more being in our bodies.
Yes. I know I need that. I'll be seeing you there.
Oh my gosh. I need it too. Yeah. And I feel, I feel really excited about that. And the workshop space on EA, I'm so excited about the people who are coming in next year. And so a couple things still need to get confirmed. I don't have the full program quite worked out yet, but I will in the next few weeks. But throughout the year, there are workshops that are curated to support the astrology of 2023, which includes Saturn's movement into Pisces and Pluto's movement into Aquarius. So two really big deal transits, along with the rest of the usual goings on, like retrogrades and eclipses and, seasonal light and things like that. And the teachers that are coming into Embodied Astrology next year are all people who are, I mean, I don't even know how to talk about them without gushing, because I just feel completely in awe, so much admiration, so much enthusiasm for the ways that they are blending astrology with other practices. And so there are a few people who are in the field of psychology, people who are doing work with ancestral healing, and people who are doing work with dream work and different kinds of archetypal work. We have a political scientist and movement organizer. There's a speculative fiction writer. There's an herbalist, a number of artists. And so there's a lot of ways for folks to get into astrology through their bodies, through experience, through enactment. These are not workshops where you're going to learn like the ins and outs of a technique, like where we're going to teach you all the rules of reading a chart or something like that. But rather, we're going to immerse ourselves in the chart and, use creative, experiential, exploratory, experimental ways to feel into them. And the people who are coming in are practiced in this. They're interpreting astrology through their different lenses and applications. So I'm feeling really excited about that. And if anyone is interested, there are a lot of offerings around those workshops. There's virtual community space, there are Q&A forums, and that's all kind of getting developed as we speak. But 2023.
Yes. was kind of meditating on the Taurus full moon chart while you were describing that. And I was looking at this because your moon's at the 15th degree of Taurus.
It
This one's
is.
at the
Yeah.
16.
Yeah.
And so is Uranus at the 16. So I was kind of seeing you here as the moon and Uranus and Taurus.
Totally.
And then the people that you were describing that you're collaborating with, you said the healers, Cancer. You said psychologist, Scorpio.
Yes.
And you said fantasy writer, Pisces.
Oh my gosh.
And I was just feeling that grand water trine. And then you as this, the person that's creating the platform and bringing everyone together in this very Uranian and Taurian way.
I love that. Thank you for pointing that out. That's exactly it.
Yeah, it's like this full moon eclipse is like that portal that initiates us into 2023. And really, as the eclipse, it does open up a portal into this next year.
Yeah, it really does. And I feel like this portal is, it's a portal that's been open since 2020, like with the square to Saturn. And we're in it. We are in it. It's like that saying, there's no way out but through. It's like we are in the fucking middle of a huge amount of transformation and change right now.
And it's highlighting that this is the final square of Saturn and Uranus, because the next time we have this axis highlighted during eclipse season will be Taurus season. And by then Saturn will have moved into the mutable water sign of Pisces. Right.
And it's the closing square with this particular Saturn Uranus dance. When did that one begin? I don't recall it right now, but.
Well, I have it in my chart.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. Saturn and
Capricorn.
Saturn and Uranus and Sag. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that was like 87, 88. And then they will join together in Gemini in 2030, Saturn and Uranus.
Wow.
Yeah. And that will be in direct opposition to where they joined in Sagittarius.
Which is where?
It's, I believe, 28th degree. Yeah.
Oh, right on the galactic corner.
Yeah, right. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So that will be interesting.
That's interesting. You saying that, and now I'm looking at your chart and it's like, oh, well, Mars is there right now. Just recently stationed retrograde. And, whatever is happening around this eclipse is, I think, preceding what's coming up with Uranus moving into Gemini in the next couple of years, and all the outer planets are changing signs in the next few years. And this Mars and Gemini moment of the power of our minds, right? Like, what are we going to talk about? What are we going to do? Where are we going to point the locus of our attention? What's the desire? What's going to be the compulsion of future growth and things like that. That Uranus Saturn conjunction. Oof.
Kind of lovingly curious about this Mars and Gemini retrograde time, because I've been sensing that too, that it's dropping us little cosmic cookie crumbs about what Uranus and Gemini might bring us. And the next full moon will be hanging out with Mars and Gemini. It'll be full moon in Gemini with Mars. So yeah. And we're looking to Mars during Scorpio season, if Mars is the traditional ruler of Scorpio. So they're all dancing with each other. That's actually something you say on your Instagram, which this could be a nice way for us to close out. You say bodies orbiting affect each other. Astrology as somatic score. Yeah,
we do. One of my favorite stories is the story of the formation of the solar system. And, one of the things that you learn is how the orbiting bodies affect each other. They pull each other into orbit. And we're also in constant movement and evolution and change. The timescales are beyond what we can comprehend in our human forms, but we do. We pull each other in, we push each other away.
I've even done a somatic exercise where you sit across from someone and you close your eyes and you talk about your relationship and then you embody it. And like one person might be kind of like, oh, no, and the other one might be like really clingy, like all up in their face. It made me think of that exercise.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you, Renee, so much for being here. It's been so lovely chatting with you. And I mean, you're just brilliant. I can't wait to listen back to the conversation and edit it. You know, I always go back and edit it, my Virgo moon. But I'll get so much from this conversation just listening back. I can already tell.
Yeah. Well, I did go on some tangents, so good luck editing. Thank you for having me on here. It's a real treat to be able to talk to you.
All right, cosmic cousins, I am wishing you a gentle Taurus full moon, total lunar eclipse. And I hope the rest of your Scorpio season is transformative, illuminating, and healing. Scorpio, baby. And then next time I see you, we'll gather for the Sagittarius new moon, which is on November 23rd. The sun enters Sagittarius on November 22nd, and then the new moon is on the 23rd. And so we're switching to this new rhythm where we're going to have new moons right at the start of the astrological season. And that will take us all the way until Aries season next year, where we'll have a new moon the first day of Aries season and a new moon the last day of Aries season to close us out. And then we'll start shifting to new moons being at the end of the astrological season. So that's just a little bit of cosmic insight into the next 5 or so months. But anyway, I'm wishing for you a gentle full moon, and I'll see you next time. Take sweet care, cousins, and remember, deep breaths.